Hey there friends, it's Mandy. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so excited to be back here with you all today, especially because we are doing our first ever installment of Modification Monday. So for basically what Modification Monday is going to be is every Monday I'll be coming at you with a video, basically taking individual yoga poses that I know I've seen my students have struggles with in my yoga classes, and just poses that I know generally can be challenging for people for whatever particular reason, and we will show some modifications and different options for them. So today we are starting with our half pigeon pose. I love this pose. It is an absolute beautiful hip opener. However, it can be a pretty deep hip stretch, so if you find that you have quite tight hips, or maybe if you have some knee problems or a knee injury that you're trying to baby, the pose can feel a little bit inaccessible at times. So today I'm going to be showing you 3 ways that we can make pigeon pose a bit more accessible. So that way you'll have some different levels to get into it, especially if you're working with a hip tightness. That way you can kind of ease and slowly open up those hips enough to be able to come into our half pigeon. So without further ado, let us get into it. All right, so here we are for our first modification for pigeon pose, which will be to prop it up. As you can see, I have brought lots of props out for us today. So I have some blocks, a blanket, a bolster. I'll be showing you some different ways to use these. However, if you don't have these props, don't worry. Give yourself permission to get creative, especially right now when a lot of us have a home yoga practice. If you have, we all have pillows, blankets, towels, books, that sort of thing. So just try and find things that are generally the same size, shape, thickness. Just do whatever you need to do. If you don't have these are absolutely totally optional. But so the first way that I'm going to show you is with a blanket. So let me move our blocks and bolster out of the way here. Okay, so basically for these props, I'm basically going to be showing you how to come into a half pigeon using props to kind of bring the floor up to you a little bit if you feel like you have a bit of a hard time getting those hips down. So this is really good if your challenge with pigeon is hip tightness. So keep in mind, I'm only going to be showing you one side of each posture, so definitely make sure in your own practice that you make sure you always do both sides of the pose, so that way we're working our body evenly. But so as we make our way into our pigeon pose here, you might find that your hips, that outer hip area, does not make it all the way down to the floor. If that's the case, that's totally fine. Don't worry. One thing we can do is we can take a blanket, draping it down in front of us like so, and we can rest our upper leg, that whichever leg is forward, on that blanket. If you find it's a little bit too far forward, you can always there we go. Pull it back there a little bit. That way it is fully supporting your hips. So right here, even though I'm propped up, I'm still getting a super beautiful stretch throughout my hips here. I definitely don't feel like I'm sacrificing on anything because I have a blanket underneath my hips. So That's option 1 with our props. Option 2, take your bolster. Now this is one that I do with my yin classes quite a bit, especially when we come into our swan pose, as swan is the yin variation of a pigeon. So this one you won't necessarily find the same activation and engagement, but it's still a really beautiful way to kind of lift those hips up a little bit and support. That way you can get that really nice hip stretch. So I have my bolster. I'm also going to place some blocks right in front here. I'm going to rest my hands on those. So basically to come into it on this side, we would step our foot over, begin to heel toe that foot over to the side a bit, begin to drop your hip down onto the bolster. Now you'll notice here, I immediately just kind of bent into that back leg. So you can make this more like a supported deer pose, where you have that back knee bent all the way in, and maybe you rest your hands on those blocks for a little bit of support. Other options, while you're using the bolster, you can begin to straighten your back leg as little or as much as you need to. Maybe you even straighten it all the way, squaring your hips and chest off towards the front. Again, maybe you just rest your hands on those blocks for a little bit of support. You can also begin to fold down. Maybe you use the blocks to prop up your forearms, maybe even come all the way down to the floor here. And as I mentioned earlier, just the same is when I was using that blanket, I don't feel like I'm sacrificing on any of the stretch here at all because I'm using the bolster, just kind of making the pose work for my body a little bit better. So to come out of it with the bolster, I tend to not come out of this one as gracefully. So usually what I like to tell my students when we have a good laugh, you just kind of put more and more weight into your hip until you gracefully fall off. And then, or slide off, that's a little bit more graceful. And then you swing your legs around. And then if you haven't already, you come into the other side. One more option with the props here. Very similar to the blanket. You are absolutely welcome to place a block under your hip if you feel like you need a little bit of extra support there. That'll help keep the hips level, help bring the floor up to you there. That way you can keep your proper alignment in the posture while just having that little bit of extra support. So those were all of the ways that we can use props to modify our pigeon pose. And next, I will show you modification number 2. All right, so let us get into modification number 2. So for this one, I'm actually going to show you a kind of different posture. We took this a little bit when we took the bolster, when we were taking some different props for our pigeon pose. So this is going to be more of a deer posture variation. I've also heard it called Z-sit. So basically what will happen, so if we're still kind of working that right side here, you would swing your left leg around and give yourself permission to have that heel and nice and close to the body here, doing our best to kind of get that front leg, so that lower leg at our best here, at kind of parallel to the top edge of our mat. Flex into your foot here. Same goes in our half pigeon pose. We want to keep that foot flexed in the front leg to really help activate all of those muscles in the lower leg to help protect the knee. So you might be right here. Other options, you can always start to work that back back leg back a little bit farther as well. For me, I do have a little bit of tighter hips, so I find it better if I have that back knee or that back heel in closer to the body with the top of the foot to the mat, and then I can really start to work on getting that left sit bone down. So in this posture, it can be a little bit challenging to get those sit bones grounded down evenly into the mat, but this is still a really beautiful option right here. So you might take it, you might stay sitting up just like this, keeping that foot active, growing tall through the lower spine. Maybe you begin to fold forward. So maybe you place your fingers down. You might walk it down, folding all the way forward, just as you would in your sleeping variation of your half pigeon, which will really start to deepen and intensify the stretch on that outer hip. So that is modification number 2, and let us now get into modification 3. All right, so for our modification number 3, we are going to be taking a figure 4. Now for our figure 4 pose, this is honestly probably aside from props, this is my go-to alternate pose outside of pigeon. I find it just generally a lot more accessible to people than our deer pose. Is a lot more gentle, is more gentle on the knees. It's also, there are a lot more places to go if you have tight hips, and it's a little bit easier to maintain that alignment. So for our figure 4, you can either do it seated upright or you can do it laying down on your back. So if we were to come into our figure 4 sitting upright, you would start in a staff pose or our dandasana. From here, and we might as well just keep going on the right leg. That's what we've been doing this whole video. So what you would do, keep both feet active and flexed. You would begin to bend into your right knee, crossing that ankle on top of the left quad just above the knee. Now you want that foot slightly dangling off the side of the leg. And when I say dangly, it's not floppy. The foot's still really strong, but you don't want to nestle in the top of the foot on the top of your leg there. So keep ankle above that knee. And maybe you just sit right here, relaxing your shoulders down. This might already be a big stretch for you. If you want more, place your hands behind you. Begin to bend into that bottom knee, and keeping the heart lifted, using your hands behind you as support. Now here, the closer you pull in that bottom foot, the more intense the stretch. The farther away the foot, the less of the stretch. So you really have a lot of control here to play around with it to find the depth and the posture that works for you and your body. And same thing, we would basically do the exact same thing with this pose on our backs. So if you wanted to take it onto your back, same exact shape. You would come lying down onto your back. You would start with that bottom leg bent, sole of the foot down onto the mat. You might just stay right here. Spine stays long, keeping the connection of the sacrum down into the floor. You think about energetically pressing that right hip crease and knee away from the body. If you want a little bit more, maybe you start to lift that foot up. You can always stack a block or something under it if you can't quite reach the leg yet. If you have the space, maybe you interlace the fingers around the hamstring. If you have even more, maybe you interlace the fingers around the shin. If you're kind of at that weird in-between place, having your foot on a block isn't quite enough, but you can't quite reach your hamstring, you can always get creative. You can grab your pants leg if you're wearing baggy pants. You might even take a strap or a belt, looping it around that hamstring, and then using that as arm extenders. So there are really lots and lots of options here. So these are just some of the ways that you can modify your pigeon pose. I know I probably ended up going into a lot more than 3 between all of my props and variations, even on figure 4. There are so many variations on figure 4, but those 2 are probably the most useful when it comes to modifying our half pigeon pose. So thank you all so very much for joining me today. If you enjoy these modification videos, let me know and I will continue to do them. If you have a posture that you would like to see modified, please don't hesitate. Drop a comment down below. Reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, email me. All of that information is in the description box down below. One thing I don't want to forget to mention is Pigeon pose is a very deep hip stretch. We usually do it towards the end of our practice, so please make sure that you are warmed up before trying any of these. Super, super important that we warm up the body, and also make sure you do both sides. I know we only played around with the right side for the purposes of this video, but trust me when I say this video could have gotten very, very long had I not put a little bit of restriction on myself. I can talk about these things forever. But anyways, thank you guys so, so much for joining me. I love you all. I love your faces. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Namaste.